Hello, everyone, and welcome to Quickstart, your first project. And this will be the first session of the Unreal Games Fellowship for 2024. In this session, we'll be looking at building a good foundation for the engine so that we all know a lot of the basics of how to get a project up and running, and where everything is, and how to use some of the main interfaces that you will be getting very used to over the next for the rest of the fellowship. Okay, so we will be covering the Epic Games launcher. So we'll be looking over that in detail, and we will be then jumping in and creating a project from one of the many templates that are available to us. We'll go over piece by piece the UI and navigation, and how to place, transform, and move objects around within the engine. We'll then be talking about importing data. And past that, we'll spend the rest of the time looking at some basic setups of how to improve a scene. So we'll be touching on the lighting, materials and textures, and the landscape and foliage. This is going to be a very, very brief, just a quick look at these. We will have other sessions where we will go over in detail, much more detail, how to use these modes within the engine. So let's talk about Unreal resources. Now, we have something called the Epic Games launcher. Now, if I fire this up, I'm going to jump in and fire up the Epic Games launcher. It looks something like this. Get rid of my taskbar. And when you fire it up, you are likely to come in at the store page. So this is Unreal's, this is Epic Games Games Store, where the majority of this will be about downloading and installing games to play. We're not going to look into this in detail in this. We're going to jump straight onto the second tab down here on the left-hand side, and that is the library tab. No, the third tab, the Unreal tab. So you suddenly see when you jump into the Unreal tab, you get a completely different section at this point. It changes because this is effectively the home page for anyone who's using Unreal Engine or Twinmotion. Well, so the first page we come up with is new. It's always sort of useful. A number of we have is some quick links into the engine for how into the website and our equivalents of social media and forums. We also have the roadmap that gives a good indication of what we are working on in the future for future releases of Unreal. Now, down below that, we'll have news, sort of news within the context of Unreal, and sample packs. But sample packs are interesting, but they will jump onto the second tab to have a look at these. Now, the sample packs are a whole load of content that Epic Games is giving away for free, which gives you this serves a number of different functions. It will some of them will be to highlight and demonstrate how to use a specific feature, such as the game's animation sample for our motion mapping and Electric Dream's environment for PCG. Some of them are starting points for games. Like, we'll be talking about different templates, but the Lyra starter game is a complete built-out shooter game with all multiplayer and functionality built into it. And it's a great point either as a reference of a suggestion of how to create a game, or as a starting point to build out a game in itself. The final one that I think is worth mentioning is the content example. Now, this is a museum-style project with a collection of maps that demonstrate specific features. We'll be looking at this, I think, in further sessions. But what's interesting about this is it is a staple within the engine and has been continuously updated with each version. And what it has is numerous different maps where you'll have ones based around animation, Niagara, fluids, all of the different features. So it'll have a ton of different maps and it'll have numerous different commented examples of what can be done. And it's a brilliant point if you ever want to if you want to do something, it's often a very great jumping point to start from so you can see how something can be set up. So next up, we have the marketplace. Now, the marketplace is where you can purchase or acquire for free different sort of assets to use within your projects. The Unreal Marketplace is integrated quite heavily into Unreal, as we will see in something that's called the Vault, which will allow you to very simply get these projects down and to work with them either in the engine or imported into your projects without much fussing around. As a point of note, there is always a free for a month options within the Unreal Engine. And this is a number of different asset packs. At this point, total to, so if you were to purchase them, a few £100. And these asset packs are, all you need to do is purchase them at zero, and then they'll be part of your permanent collection. Now, these come out on the first Tuesday of every month. So it's worth sort of checking in and just collecting those. Otherwise, it is searchable, browsable by categories, searchable by tags, and sourceable by things like price. For example, if you were to go low to high, you're going to see all the free stuff to start off with. So if you're looking for stuff, you can see there's just a ton of free stuff in here. The legality of using any of the stuff in here is fine, because in order for you to place to list something within the Epic Store, we have to be sure that you are that you have your legality correct. You have the ownership, and so using anything from here within the project is absolutely fine. You're not going to have to list it within your declaration form at the end. Next up, we have your library. Now, this is where we're going to be spending the majority of our time. This is a this is the point where we touch the actual engine. So as you can see at the top here, we have something that is called engine versions. Now, Unreal periodically updates the engine itself. And we have major releases, which are, as you can see here, is we've got 1.1, 1.2, and so on, major releases at points. And, well, I suppose that's minor releases. The major releases are when we go from something like 4 to 5 that we did recently. These are, you can get an extra version of the engine by pushing plus here. So you can see I have 5 versions of the engine presently installed. An extra version will allow you to install something. One of the hints is if you are to install it, look at the options, because there's a lot of stuff that you can. The engines are big, but if you go through the options, you'll probably find there's a whole load of stuff that you don't have to include, especially if you know which system you're building to. We are building to a PC for our final packaged project in this. So those are the engine versions. And as you can see here, I have a list of all hundreds of different projects that I am constantly working on. And below this, we have the Vault, which we will discuss in detail as we go on. So let's create a project so that we can go on. So this fellowship, we are going to be working in 5.4. So you should hopefully have 5.4 downloaded at this point. especially if you're working from one of the templates, because it's not easily to make something backwardsly compatible. So I'm going to hit so I've already installed this. So the first thing you would do if you wanted to install it is click the install and then download all of the files and follow the tutorials. Next up, I am going to hit the launch button. And we're going to give this a minute. Okay, so here we go. So this would be your starting point. If you don't already have a project created that you can jump into, this is how we create a new project. So our first element we have is the recent projects tab in the top left here, and that's going to list all of the previous projects that we have on our computers. And it'll do a search for them, so it should find all of them. But what's interesting is down the left-hand side here, we have a number of templates. So first up, we have a number of templates for games, where we've got a blank, first person, third person, top down, handheld, AR, virtual reality, and vehicle. Now, there are more in different industries. Now, what this is this is a jumping off point. You're going to get an Unreal project, but it's going to have different plugins installed, some basic levels set up, and some characters and game modes set up from scratch, just to mean that you're not starting from nothing. We are recommending you guys use the project files that we'll be providing you with. That hopefully you'll have access to shortly. Now I'll show you how you can grab these elements and drag them into your projects if you need them at any point, because you're going to find there are a lot of elements in it, such as the sort of money and animations and the cars and stuff like that you might want to drag from one project to another. Anyway, we have on the right hand side, we have so we start off at the bottom. I'm going to use just my download folder because I know that it is deletable at that point, and I'm going to call this intro. And so this is where you want the project to be placed and the project name, such as introduction here. Ideally, it's good to have the project itself on a relatively fast hard drive because it's going to be loading stuff in and out of memory quite a lot. So you want an SSD ideally, or something quite good, because it's going to affect how enjoyable it is to actually use your project. Now we have a couple of options on project default. So first thing is I'm going to select one of these, and I'm going to select the third person just because it gives us something that we can visually see and play around with. And this comes with a playable character and a camera position behind it so that we can see what's going on at any one point. Now, there are other different options and they have different setups. Now, on the project defaults, we have a couple of options. We have Blueprints or C++. Now, you are not committing to, if you've got a project that's built in Blueprints, you can convert it to a project in C++ and generate the working files for it relatively easily. Going from C++ back to Blueprints is it's sort of difficult / unnecessary, because you don't have to fire a project up in C++. But it is C++ is the underlying coding language which we use with Unreal Engine, which is relatively complicated, and you need to use something like Visual Studio in order to code with it. Blueprints, as we're going to go into detail on, is our node-based visual programming language, which is used within the editor, which gives you most functionality. It gives you a whole load of functionality. Most functionality you'll find that you need when creating a game. And all it is going away and running C++, compiled for C++ code. So it's pretty damn fast. It's not quite as fast. There's a little bit of an overhead for using it, but it is fast. For the fellowship, we will be using blueprints for all of our projects, and all of the code that we've got previously written for the templates are going to be in blueprints and will be commented. We are not, you can use C++ if you are more if you're more comfortable using C++. However, you'll probably find that the support is a little bit harder to get hold of if you get stuck. So I recommend you do that. Now we've got a target platform. For this case, so we're going to use the desktop. We're not creating for mobile. Quality preset, I'm okay with maximum. I've got a relatively powerful computer here. But if you're running on something slower, you might want to come to scalable. There are options within the engine. Now we have two other options here, starter content and ray tracing. So ray tracing says if it should be supported from a new project. We're not going to be using that. Now the starter content, I'm gonna leave it off, but I will add the starter content to the project. So I just want to demonstrate how we do that. Now, starter content is very useful, well, for me especially, because what it has is it has a number of different materials, a number of different meshes and effects, which you can easily add into a project. So it gives you something to start with, rather than having sort of nothing. You've got some bushes, some plants, some ground materials. It gives you something to use. So if you haven't already got that in a project, because it's relatively large actually, so if you can avoid it, you might not want to include it if you're really worried about size. But it's very useful for demonstration purposes. Okay, so I'm going to create my project here. I'm going from third person using games. I'm sticking with blueprints, and I'm not including starter content. Now, the arcade machines, I think they're capable of, oh yeah, they're pretty strong machines. So ray tracing is possible to be used. And the way that we're going to flip between games is I'm going to be writing like a program which will just allow you to fire up games. But it's a very, I haven't started working on yet, but it's a very basic program. And what it's going to do is it is going to when you fire it up, it will kill the previous application that's running, and it will start up the new game when you kick it off. So theoretically, if your project doesn't work in itself, we'll try and fix it, or otherwise not. But it will add a level of complication. There's no reason why you can't. But yeah, it's just a question of if something that should be fine. I mean, you might want to touch with. I think it's a packaging issue, I would say more. But yeah, theoretically, if you're dead cert you want to use ray tracing, then you can. The computer should be able to run with it. Obviously, with any optimization, there's a cost involved with any feature that you add on. So you might need to sacrifice fidelity somewhere else. But yes, you can use ray tracing. You might find it complicates things. So, all right. So we're back into the engine now. It's if they do. So I'll try and stop a lot for questions, because this is a real sort of. I want to make sure everybody gets on the same board. So we fired up the project. We have our first project. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to chat a little bit about file saving and copying. Now, in your traditional applications, what you would have is your software saves to a singular file. So Photoshop, for example, would save to a PSD, Word to a .doc, and Maya to a .mb. Now, if you've been in game development or a lot of other different things, you probably come across projects that tend to be too large and require require sharing in order to make this a practical means of saving anything. That's why when we're working with Unreal Engine, we um, we will have multiple different files referenced within one games project in itself. It will um, it's so for example, and what will happen is when you import something into an Unreal project, it will save it in a format which is understandable by Unreal. So, for example, the if we're saving a level, it will be converted into a .umap, and I know there are some other exceptions, but pretty much everything else is going to be using the .u asset file file type. And that is just once we brought it in, we brought it into the Unreal in a file format that it can understand. So, for example, if I was to come from Maya, I would import an FBX, and it would save it as my mesh underscore .u asset. So you'll find if I was to what's the next? Yeah, so I'll just demonstrate this. If we would jump into the engine that we've got here, if I go into character, for example, we've got the meshes for the old school Mani. Now you can see here we have the content browser in the bottom left-hand side. I'll go over these all in detail. But if I was to right-hand click on any of these and select Show in Explorer, you would see that the file system has a absolute equivalent of absolute equivalent of the files that are in here. Now, these can be moved around and placed in different directories, or you can take U assets from other projects and dump them into this project. And that is a applicable way of doing it. However, where it would fall apart is on two fronts. The first point is if, firstly, you were trying to bring it in from a other version of the engine. Now, sometimes this will work. If you bring something in from 5.3 and into 5.4, sometimes it will work fine, but no, not always. So it's recommended that you drag stuff in from same versions of the engine. The other thing that's going to break is something that's called references. Now, all of these assets are going to be referencing. The chances are there are some exceptions, but most Unreal files will be referencing other Unreal assets within a project, so that like for example, you can see here that this skeletal mesh is probably going to be referencing the physical asset and the skeleton itself. And then if we had a player character, it would probably be referencing the skeletal mesh and so on. So, and as soon as you move something about or chuck stuff about outside of the editor, it will break those references. And then you'll have to manually go in and fix them all to get it to work. So even though you can access this through the Explorer file system, just be wary of making sure that they will fit in correctly. Okay, let's jump back into the present. Yeah, so all of the files are directly connected to a file on the disk. Okay, so project structure. I think this is a little bit misleading as an image as it is, because but usually what we would have, it's because it's not actually how it works so much, but when you've got a project, within a project you'll have numerous levels, and a level will have numerous actors in it. I'm going to talk about an actor, but they are things that you can place in the world. We'll go. So imagine when we're talking about an actor, we're talking about meshes, which are sort of objects, skeletal meshes, characters, blueprints, special effects, and we will refer to as a actor. So yeah, so you'd have your overall project, which would have numerous, levels within it, and those levels would have actors. Okay. What I'm going to do now I think is the right time for us to start jumping around the editor in itself. I think details panel should be down here. I'm trying to make sure the world panel outline. That's the normal layout. Okay, so I'm just going to try and get this to be the absolute normal layout. So once you have jumped into the project, you are likely to have something that looks like this. Is anybody having a problem getting a project open? Do please throw in chat, because I really don't want to lose people at this early moment. So okay, so, or if you have any questions, we are 40 minutes through, so we've got plenty of time. Okay, so hopefully everyone is at this point. Now, we have a number of different sections within the engine here. So the first thing that we have is we've got the viewport. I'm going to go into this in detail. Let's have a look at the quick top section here. So we have a number of different menus across the top bar here. The ones that you're going to really care about off the cuff are going to be under edit. We have the editor preferences, the project settings, and the plugins. So the editor preferences will control how this editor works in itself. I don't use that as much, but it's the actual physical editor itself. The project settings is tons of different settings about your project, like what lighting system you're using, how you're just there's a ton, but you'll often be sent to the project settings in order to look for these elements. Finally, we have plugins, and plugins, if I open it up, these are when you choose different templates at the beginning, you will get a number of different plugins ticked on or off. A lot of these are common. Some of them, if you add something, install something from the engine, might come from the marketplace. Unreal itself offers a ton of different plugins, and these will affect how what code you have and what options you have available to you and what you can do within the engine. They'll often require a restart, but if you're doing a tutorial or I'm teaching something, or you're going from flat and you see a node that you can't get hold of, there could be a number of reasons, but one of them could be that you don't have that plugin installed. So most of our classes will often start saying these are some dependencies of plugins that you have to have selected. Okay, so just be aware that they exist, and there are some great ones in there. Like, for example, with Niagara, we have I think we have the fluid systems here. This has got some great effects in it. There's some animation stuff in there. There's a whole load of stuff that's in here. Yeah. Okay, so like it's an actors palette I've never tried. So that's project settings, plugins, things. Apart from that, there are a couple other tools and little odds and sods that we will go into as we move on through the project. Next up, across the top here, we have the toolbar. Now, toolbar on the top left, we have save button. This will save. Now, it's important to understand what is going to be saved when you push save. Now, save, this is going to save the current level to a disk. Now, you might have a ton of different things open. You might have a lot of actors that you've been doing work on. You might have animations that you've edited. Now, this is going to save the U map. It's not going to save everything that you're working. If you want to save everything, you can either come up here and go save all, or there is something in the content browser that we will touch on in a bit. Next up, we have the browse. Now, this again links to the content browser, so it might be worth us going to that. But say I wanted to, yeah, that will bring up the content browser. Is that what it does? Yeah. Okay. And next we have selection mode. We will look at this, but these are a number of different options that will change the way that the whole interface changes. So by default, we start off in the selection mode, and this here allows us to place objects and move them around the level sort of manually. And this is where you'll spend a good percentage of your time. But we also have one dedicated to creating landscapes, foliage, painting meshes, vector painting, modeling now, fracturing that allows you to use chaos to destroy stuff, brush editing, a geometry tool for laying out levels, which I hardly ever use, but lots of other people swear by it, and animation. Next up, we have a button which allows us to quickly add things to our project. Now, it's a little bit of, you'll see that this is broken down into two sections. We've got get content and we've got place actors. And we're going to talk a lot about how to get content, but the place act, they're slightly different. So get content is going to be about getting content into your project. So it'll be bringing files or marketplace content or Quixel Bridge stuff into your project. And on the other one, the other place actors is about taking files or taking blueprints for taking things from your project and placing them within the level. So this, for example, if I was to add in a cube, you'll see a cube is created in the level. Now, this is not, I haven't imported a cube into my project. I have just created an instance of a cube in this level. Okay, so and we'll be touching on these in quite a bit, but these will allow you to have a whole load of stuff. And like with a lot of our menus here, we have just a simple search. So if I typed in mesh, for example, I could, oh, it doesn't even have a stat. Let's try static. No, it doesn't have a static mesh singular actor, but I could add in shapes. I could search for nav mesh volumes, a whole load of different things. And it'll allow us to just add them in. So this is one way of getting stuff into your level. And if they are common classes, this is a good method because you won't be able to get them from the content browser. Next up, we have a link for, this is a logo for blueprints. Now, we've got something in here that's called the Open the Level blueprint. We'll touch on that when we're doing the blueprint, the blueprint classes. But now we have sequencers. Again, we have a full class on the sequencers. But finally, we have play button here. And now, if I was to hit play, you would see that within the editor, the game will start. So I can now take Quinn and run around the level. So whatever game that you're creating, at the point you hit play, it will run. Now, escape will bring you out of this. We do have a couple of other different options. So for example, and if I do a drop down here, you can see that we have a new editor window. So this will run the game, but in a completely new editor window, if that's useful to you. So we also have the standalone game mobile. I'm not going to touch on that. Standalone game, rather than running it in the editor, because the editor itself has some overheads, this is going to do a sort of, it's a simple sort of compile, but it will run it as a game instance in its own right. So you'll see that this is often more representative of the speed that it would run on a computer, run than the final thing. However, it still has the overhead of the editor because it's kicking around in the background. And it does not escape out of easily. So I will just kill that plot manager. Oh, this is fearful. I don't want to kill. Oh no, I should be able to. There you go. I want to kill the wrong one. Okay, so and there's a final one that we have here, which is simulate, and this is useful. It will do nothing in this example until I would do something like add something in that had physics in it. So if I just very simply come in here, I'll add a cube, and I'll go over the details panel, but there is a setting in here that says simulate physics. If I was to turn that on, as I simulate the game, it will not create the pawn or the character, but it will start running the game logic and everything that's in the world. So if I can see how things function. Now, that is, it will, you can see here that now I've got it set to simulate. It's going to do that every single time. Let me take that back to the selected viewport and just kill it. Okay, so that is our toolbar across the top. We've also got platforms. I'm gonna leave that for some more advanced talks. Okay, so next up we have the viewport that is here. Now, let's talk about navigation. So the first thing is, if you want to, this is going to be where we do a lot of our laying out and putting some stuff in. So if you want to move anything about, we're going to have to look at some basic key presses at this point. So the first thing is, if you were to hold down the left-hand mouse button and move the mouse, you can see that you can sort of move about in the world with a locked Z. So you're not going to be able to move up and down. If you, now that's just with moving the mouse at this point. You're also not going to be able to move the camera. Now, if you hold down the right-hand mouse button, you'll see this is a bit more game orientated. As I move my mouse around with the right-hand mouse button, I'm going to be able to move the rotation of the camera. Now, what's useful with these is once you include the WASD buttons, with W being forward, S being backwards, A left, and D right, now you've got the ability to kind of move around the engine. So they work in both of them. Just one of them allows you to rotate, and the other one will move you on the axis. So holding down either of the buttons and W, A, S, and D is going to allow you to move around. But I usually use the right-hand one because that's going to allow me to look around and focus on stuff. So please do give that a go. The other two buttons that we've got for movement are Q and E. Now, again, you need to hold down the right-hand mouse button. And if you hold down Q, it is going to lower you. And if you hold down E, it's going to move you up and down on the vertical axis. So again, the standard way most people move around scenes is to hold down the right-hand mouse button and use the W, S, A, and D for left and right, Q and E for up and down. Now let's look at the middle mouse button. Oh, God. I think, middle mouse button, unfortunately, is if you find that you're zooming all over the place, it's probably your camera speed. So you can see in the top right-hand corner here, I have a drop down for camera speed. Because I've used the middle mouse button, it's made it massively high. But what you'll find is at the right, if you, with the right-hand mouse button down, if you use the mouse wheel, it's going to change the speed that your camera moves within the level. So I'm going to try and keep it at 1. Z and C are going to change your field of view. Find that useful? I don't usually. Just find it. So hold down the right-hand mouse button and Z and C will change your field of view. Sorry, I'm going to try and calm down the movements because I know it's give people seasickness. Okay, so Z and C, AW and S, Alt. If I was to grab something, hold down the Alt button. I always get this one wrong. So with something selected and holding down Alt and the left mouse button. Okay, now it allows you to tumble, but it's tumbling around. So I'm just going to focus. You can tumble around something if you hold down the left mouse button and Alt. So I'll try that out. Now, this brings me to the other button, which is the one that I've used in this instance, and that's the F button. And this is a good advanced move for moving quickly around the engine. So if you were to select something, so by left clicking on something, you can see you get an outline around it like this. If you hold down the F button, it will focus. So it will place that object within the bounding. So it will fill the screen with that object. So then if I hold down Alt and left click, I can tumble around that object. So focus is a really useful one because if you want to jump from one side of the screen to another, you can do it really, really quickly just by selecting an object that's close to it and pressing the F button. So that's F for moving around. Now, the other hint for moving around quickly is bookmarks. Now, say I know I want to be working above this for a while. What I could do, if I bring up the camera to here and I hold down the Control button and press 1, that will create a bookmark for that location. Then, say I want to be looking at this, and go and focus, scale around, focus again. Also, the mouse wheel is going to drag you backwards and forwards. If I press Control 2, that's going to create another bookmark. Now, just by hitting 1, I will jump to the bookmark above, and by hitting 2, I will change to my other bookmark. So it's a really nice way. And you can do that all the way up to 0. So you can create 10 bookmarks for around your scene, allowing you to quickly move around the scene as you go. So that is Control. Okay. Do we have any questions in chat? Is anyone having any trouble moving around the viewport?
We're doing good so far, tackling everything with hotkeys and a bazillion screenshots.
Fantastic. Brilliant. That's what I like to hear. Okay, so that's going to give you a quick movement around things. Now let's talk about moving objects around, using objects. Okay, so as you can see, I have created a cube, and I recommend that you guys come in and grab a cube or a sphere or a cone or a plane and get something in the level, because we're gonna we're going to move these around and we're going to duplicate them and we're going to place them within the world. So one of the first ways of getting stuff in is just by using the place actor section between inside this element here. Now we will come onto the content panel in a bit, but let's just stick within the viewport at this moment. Now, once we've got something within the level, we probably don't want it there. We probably want it anywhere else. Now, this is an actor, and we know it's an actor because we can see it and it's in the level and it's at a location. Now, up the top here, we have a number of different sort of, I think it's called, I don't know, sort of, I like to call them widgets, but sort of selection modes. Now, at the moment, we've got select object, and all this allows us to do is select specific objects. Now, they are not, and that's fine. That's cool. But it doesn't allow us to do much with them. Now, we have also got something that's called translate object. And if we were to select the translate object option, Mikhail has his hand up. Can you check to see if you've got a question, Mikhail? Throw it into lecture and the lecture notes, and Franco and Lucas can translate it to me, or fix it. Okay, so once we've selected translate, and we can get to this by just pushing the W key. So you'll see that this relates to the Q, W, E, and R. So if you were to push Q, it would bring you up as the selection. It means you can do nothing really. W means translate, and that's going to allow us to change the location. E is going to be rotation, and R is going to be scale. So you can quickly flick between these, or you can just click on them up in this section in the top corner. Now, so the first one that we have is location. Now, the first thing that you can do is you can, if you place your mouse over these, you'll see that different axes turn yellow. So I'm going to come a little bit, I'll come a little bit closer. So, for example, if I was to go, I'm going to go smaller so you can see it. The blue axis is going to allow me to move it up and down on the blue axis side. Green is going to take us sort of, I don't want to say left and right because it depends on the way you're looking at it, but on this axis, and red on this axis. Now, there is, if you look at it, there is a square between these. So if I was to come over and select the square, you can see that both the up and the cross axis are selected. And that means it's going to lock it to one axis, but it's going to allow me to move around. And I can do the same on different axes. So if I eliminate the up and down, it means I can change its position on the ground. Finally, if you go over the center, it does nothing in this one. Oh, does it? Yeah, you can move it around in the center, but it's a bit of a confusing of where it would end up. Okay, so those are your standard ways of moving around. There's a couple of other options, one of them being the end key. What the end key is going to do is it's going to drop your mesh to the ground. So it's going to look at the collision box and it's going to drop it so that it sits on the ground. It's really useful if you want to place something down, because otherwise it can be fiddly in order to move these things about. Now, so what I would like to do is look at one of these other boxes. If you move something around, it looks pretty smooth. But if I was to increase that to 100, so you can see that, this is the grid snap value. So now you'll be able to see that this is moving in 100 intervals. So I can change this value, and I can change it to different amounts. They say that I had a panel that are all 500 wide, and I wanted to make sure they're all exactly 500 apart. I could change the grid snap value to 500 here, and that will mean that this will only move in 500 chunks. I can also click on the blue box, which is going to turn that off. So you can turn on and off snapping at these points. So this first box here is in reference to location. So, and you can see here when we're on the floor that it's really quite useful that I can turn off the snapping. I can select two axes because I can move this around and place it somewhere else on the flat floor. So it gives me quite a lot of control. Okay, I will stop for a break after we've done the three sort of layout sections. Okay, so hopefully you've all had a bit of a go at placing and moving objects around. Remember, the F key is going to allow you to zoom into stuff and bookmark keys. Now, next up, let's have a look at rotation. And a sphere is not the best thing for like rotation. So again, if I was to select rotation, you'll see that we now have three axes. Again, we've got the blue, which is going to be the Z axis, and the green and the red axis. So this is going to allow us to rotate a object in space on different axes. We don't have the option of picking two axes at any one time. We do have just go into. Okay, what's interesting as well is we've got an option here to transform the gizmos coordinates between world and local space. So as you can see, as I switch this on and off, the gizmo is going to change to local space rather than world space. And so if I jump back to this and I rotate our what's his names, you'll see that works the same with the translation and rotation. So that's going to I usually leave this as world space because that sort of makes the most sense to me, but you do have the option of moving stuff around in local space. It's a lot more sense when you're seeing it in rotation. So again, rotation, we have the same element here that we can snap stuff. So if I was to change this to, say, 45 degrees, you'd see that the cube only rotates in a 45-degree increments. And I can switch that off, but just by unticking the blue box on the element. Finally, we have scale. So I'm going to go. And if we select scale, again, we get a different gizmo, which is visually different, but functions in a very similar way. I can either scale stuff on a singular axis, or I can scale stuff on a couple of different axes. Or if I highlight the center, I can keep the uniform scale the same and scale it up and down by moving the mouse up and down. So I can scale the whole thing up or down, keeping the relationship between them the same. So it will scale them all up percentually in the same way. So scale, again, we got exactly the same thing. We've got scaling options, so I can choose to only scale by one each time. And that means that I will come up in increments of exactly the same size. Now, one of the other interesting things that's probably not mentioned is we do have a undo button. So Control Z is we're going to be able to Control Z back through all of the different changes that we had and get things back into the original location. So if you do move something, the Control Z will allow you to undo what you've previously done within the editor. I'm not sure if there is a control forwards, but oops. Okay. Okay. See, it's interesting. We've got some test something out. Oh, it's not that. Oh, look, you can do that. Okay, I was not aware of that. No, you can't. Well, yes, you can. Oh, but they're all in the same location. Okay. Sorry, I'm just finding out new stuff as I'm going. Um, let's talk about duplicating objects or creating new ones. So the first one, we talked about Control Z, so I think this is probably worth talking about at the same time. If you were to do, we use the clipboard sort of like quite a lot within this. If I was to do Control C, that's copy, and then Control V, it will create another version. However, it doesn't know where to create it. So it will probably create it at the same location that you've just created it. I can create multiples by control C and um, control V. You can also do control X and then control V to bring it back. However, what is my most common way of copying assets is by with the asset selected. If you hold down the Alt key and then drag away, it will create a new version of the asset. Or if you select one, you're capable of selecting multiple assets by holding down the Shift key. So if I hold down the Shift key, you can see that I now have two of these selected. So if I was to drag these, hold down the Alt key and drag up, you would see that we now can do a copy of the entire selection. So holding down the Alt and moving something is going to create you a duplication. Now, if I hold down the Alt and rotate, it's going to be the same thing. So we've now got a completely new one here. I don't think it's the same. If I was to do, I don't think it works with scale. No, it doesn't work with scale. It only works on where you're changing the location. The rotation doesn't work. So if you want to create new assets, and you'll use this a lot, especially if you're using lots of trees or posts or something like that, you will want to be on the same line. Just holding down the Alt button and moving stuff around is going to allow you to create duplications. So ways of getting stuff in, so either duplicate something that's already in the level or find it within the place actors. There are a couple other ways of doing it. There is a window we have here for place actors, which actually come up on the left-hand side. This is kind of a callback really from previous versions, but it does allow you to create new stuff, but we don't really use that anymore. But if you ever want to have a play with it, you can. No, I can't get rid of it. Windows, latent. Oh, that's interesting. Go away. Okay, hidden it. Okay, so we know how to move elements around. We know how to copy stuff. If you hold down Shift, you're capable of copying numerous pieces as you're going. And we have the ability so we've got the ability to copy stuff, move stuff around, snap. One other thing I'd like to mention while we're here is the G key. So the G key is something I mentioned quite early on because it often sort of throws people. Because if you push the G key, you can see that your map is going to change. So, for example, we have an actor here, which is a player start. So this is denoting the location for the player to start. Now, if I push the G key, it's going to disappear. And this is going to be because what it's going to do is it's going to hide any elements which are not visible within the game. So being able to push G in order to get rid of that is if you ever feel like you're missing things or a bit confused, try hitting the G key. Okay. So we've had it. Let's take. I think. Are there any questions? Otherwise, I think we'll take a break there for 5 minutes.
Yeah, Ed, let's go for a break. That sounds good. We have a ton of questions, but we're taking good care of them.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, in that case, it's now. What I'll do is let's get back at 20. Well, let's be about 17 past that point then. So about a 5 minute break. So we will go from then. I'll stop recording. For Michael Fried has raised a hand again. If you can throw any questions into the lecture notes, and Franco and Lucas can direct them accordingly. Okay, so pause the recording. Okay, right. Well, let's jump into the next bits of the engine, shall we? Is everyone back okay? Do we have any questions that you think need looking at now?
No, we're good, Ed.
Okay. So, we've looked at the viewport. There are a couple of other elements of stuff that that are worth touching on here. We have, and we'll go into these in more details. We've got some viewport options. We've got stuff like, for example, we can show the frames per second. That's going to display up here how fast the scene is rendering. It will also turn on show stats, which is if we're going to print anything to the screen, usually for debugging, that's useful. A couple other options here. For example, we've got game view that we talked about before, which turns things on and off. Immersive view, which is F11, which is just full screen, effectively. Never get to work on this keyboard, but full screen. I think I can do that like that. Okay. So there are a couple of other options here. But we've also got the ability to change the layout. So we can have a number of panels. And as you can see here, as I've dragged up a panel, it's given it to me an odd look. It's showing it to me in wireframe and above. So you can see here, next to this, we have top and wireframe. So this sort of indicates what these two options are. The top one is going to allow us to change to a different orthographic view. So it's going to give it a flat view, which is useful for us if we want to place things. We can do that from the top, bottom, left, right, front, or back. Or we can go back to perspective. We've got our right-hand panel in here. Now, it's also showing us in wireframe. Now, we've got a lot of other options here. And I would go explore them yourself mostly. Lit is our standard one. That's going to look something like this. It's not going to show the sky dome in top view, so you'll get this odd background. Unlit is just going to give us the albedo, or the sort of base color of everything. Sometimes useful. And then we've got a whole load more, and this isn't really the course to go over it. A useful one are the collisions. We can show that in here. Now, showing this allows us to, this gives us a whole load of other different options as well, which we'll go over in future courses. There are a couple of interesting ones, such as buffer visualizations and optimization view modes, that can really help us to see what might be making our game run slowly, such as lighting complexity and shader complexity. But there is a lot up here in our different options. Now, most of the time, I'm just going to be doing a singular one panel and working in perspective, but you have that as options for you. Now let's look at what we have on the right-hand side here. Now, as with most applications, we can move things about. We can add panels and we can bolt them in different places. But this is usually tends to be your default layout as you come into the engine. You might want to have your own. You can also save the layout through, I forgot where we save it, but yeah, save the layout here. You can either load layouts or save layouts. Like I have a default one built in just as a quick way to, if people mess up their setup. If you find that you've broken it, you can always come in here and just load the default editor layout. That'll take you back to something like this. So on the right-hand side, we have the first thing at the top here we have is the outliner. Now, your outliner is effectively a list of everything that's in your scene. So as you can see here, we've got different blocks. As I select something in the outliner, you'll see that it selects it in the scene itself. As I select large amounts of objects, it selects large amounts of objects within the scene. So it's a one-to-one track. And this is sometimes useful for a number of different reasons. Firstly, you might have trouble finding something. Secondly, sometimes you'll add stuff into the scene which only has one of these billboard things to select, and they might be hard to select, or they might be transparent. I think if you've got something transparent, you can hold down T and it'll allow you to select it. It'll allow you to find stuff. This is searchable. So if I knew I wanted cubes, I can type in cubes at the top and it's going to limit it to just being the cubes. It's also got a little button that I can quickly turn the visibility on and off on certain elements. So it's got a number of different odds. It will show you the type and the package short name, which isn't terribly useful. And this is editable. I think I can turn off the package short name, for example, because I hardly ever use that. Just the type. So this is a one-to-one relationship of what is in your level. Okay, so for example, post-process volume, this is great to be selected within here because it's quite tricky to find. It's only this little wired box in this case, so it might be quite hard to select. But it's quite easy to select from within a outliner. Okay, next up we have the details panel. And we are going to encounter a details panel a lot throughout the engine. It exists in pretty much every view mode. But what it is a contextual options details of the object that you have. So as I select the post-process volume, all of the details value will be existent from the post-process volume. As I select a static mesh, you'll see that everything is relevant to the static mesh. Now, as I select multiple static meshes, which is quite interesting, you'll see that all of the options which are common to all of the things, these static meshes, will still be available for me to edit. So say, for example, I wanted to change the material. I could change the material and it will change it on all of the ones that I've got selected. So you can see we have some pink cubes. So as you select all of them, the ones that are available and common to that type, you can still change. So it's a great way if you want to select and change a lot of things. However, if you if there's something that's got different values, so you can see here the rotation on this, it says multiple values. So the rotation is I could change this and update it so that they're the same, but they're not the same as one. So it would only show me the ones that are the same. And you'll also see on the right-hand side next to this, I've got this little back arrow. And what this will do, if I hit this, is it will return the values to the default values in that class. So when you create something, somewhere a default will be set. If you're adding a static mesh actor into the scene, you'll have a default material selected within your static mesh asset. When I hit this back arrow, it's going to return it to that. So you can see in this case, apparently that is the default material, which is the prototype grid. And yeah, and that's fine. But it's done it on all of my selected elements. Now, I'm going to, let's look. You will notice here we have something that's called a transform. And any actor, it's actually the thing that denotes that it's an actor is means it'll have a transform. And the transform means this is its, I think it's a relative in most cases. So its location in 3D space. So as you can see here, our transform, we have the location at the top, which is quite a large values. Then we have rotation and scale. So because when you're working in 3D, you're working in 3 axes. So in order rather than 2D, which would be 2 axes, you've got 3 axes. So it's height, width, and well, that's wrong, but you could say X, Y, and Z basically. You can see these here. So as I move my cube around on the green axis, you can see that the green value is updating within the transform location. So that is the transform of this value. And so I can manually change these values rather than having to, if I wanted to be at a specific value, I can type them in, or I can programmatically change these values in order to control things. So that is quite a useful, I'm going to turn off simulate physics from this. So it's important to sort of understand how that works. We've also got scale. Now, scale has a little lock next to it. If I tick on that lock, it means it is locking all of the axes to be the same value. Again, we've got backs that will take us back to the default value. I'm going to select that and change that back to the default value. We've also got the mobility. This is to tell if this is a movable object. You'll see that standardly static meshes are set to static. However, because I turned on simulate physics on this one, it changed it to movable. So that it knows this is a movable object and needs to be treated accordingly. So that is the transform. You can either update it within the viewport with the widgets, or you can manually update it within the details panel, or you can even programmatically update it. Again, loads and loads of settings. And whenever you get into a different part of the engine, whenever you've got the details panel, it is going to be the details of whatever you have selected. It might be a node, it might be a file. It will change dependent on what you've got selected at any one time. Now, at the top here, I just think this is worth mentioning because it's not, unless you come from a programming background, it might be something that's a little bit more difficult to understand. Now, we can see that this is a cube, and it has a static mesh component beneath it. And that's because this instance of a cube has a singular component, and that is a static mesh. And if I was to have a blueprint, as we'll go into blueprints and details, you might have numerous components within your blueprint. But I'm going to set the rotation back to the default. But you can add components, and you can add them within the blueprints, which is a template for an actor that you'd move out, or you can add them manually at this point. So I think this would work. If I search for rotating movement, so you can see that I've added a component in. And so I could add numerous. I could add a skeletal mesh, and then I could set that skeletal mesh to be many. And so you could see that this is now part of this actor. So if I grab that entire actor, I can now move around. So you can see I've just added a component to it. So sometimes you're going to need to select components in order to change stuff. You'd often do these within blueprints, but it's important to see how it looks. So we've got the overall actor, which has a component of a static mesh component, and it also has a component of a skeletal mesh component that I've just added to it. Now the final one is the rotation movement. Now if I was to simulate, you'd see that this rotates. And that's because this is a component which adds rotating functionality into our actor. Now you can do this within blueprints, and we will, but just be aware of how it exists and how it looks within the detail panel. And also that if I select this, I've got all of the main values that are in here. But if I search for rotate, I've only got the rotation. However, if I selected the component within it, I've now got some more controls. So I could change the rotation. So I could add in 100. I could increase that to 300. And so the rotation rate now is going to rotate in a completely different way. So that is a setting from within the rotating movement component. So you'll see this with PCG volumes. You'll see this with a lot of things. That sometimes you're going to have to select the component within an actor in order to get specific functionality. Okay, so that is our rotation. So that's the details panel. Now there's one panel that has been removed here because I've selected that one. And if you want to get a new panel up, we just need to come up to Window. And the panel that I am looking for is the world settings. And this is your details panel effectively for the level that you are in. Because you can't select a level, we need the world settings, which is the equivalent of a settings. So that's going to give us the settings for an actor. The world settings is going to give us the settings for the world. And a part of it that's important is there's a number of things. Too much for me to go over in one go. But the thing that's going to get you quite a few times is the game mode override. Now you can either set the game mode within the project settings. So the project settings is the overall entire project, or you can set it within the world settings, which is within here. So you can override your defaults. There's going to be a lot of defaults and overriding done in these next few weeks. And this is what classes are the default classes that you will work with within the engine. So you can see here we have the game mode override for the third person game. And you'd see that there are other ones here, and we'll add some in just so that we can demonstrate it. And that gives us the pawn, which is the what character you would be using within the world, and a number of other different settings, which Martin will go over in detail. Okay, so that's the world settings, and that's going to have settings for the world or the level map. There's 50 different ways to say it. Now, there's one panel that we have not looked at here, and that is the content drawer. Now, a content drawer, if you press anchors, control space, this will bring up the content drawer. And you will find if you are, I'm just going to create something quickly. Create an actor. If I am in a different part of the engine, so this is an example of a different part of the engine we have not touched on. If I press control and space, it'll also bring up the content drawer. Now, we touched on the content drawer a little because the content drawer is our file management system. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this dock in layout in the right-hand side here, because I'm just used to it from previous versions of the engine. And I do a lot of stuff in the content drawer. Okay, so content drawer is our file system. Clear that down, reset filters. And it's got a number of different options and odds and sods in here. We've got so much to cover in only 25 minutes and going slow. And so the first thing is you've got on the left-hand side here, you've got the file structure, which you can navigate around. Now, if I was to come into meshes, for example, now you'll see here that we have a couple of different skeletal meshes. So skeletal meshes are meshes which have a skeleton beneath them. It means that they can be deformed. So you can create stuff like people that can move. What I have a number of pink assets here. Now, say I didn't want to, like, for example, I can't get a static mesh from this. If I wanted to get Quinn from here, I would not be able to get her into the world. However, if I wanted to drag Quinn in from here, I could. Now, what's important to know is that this is skeletal mesh, and when I drag it in, what it will try and do is it will try and figure out what you want to do with whatever you are dragging in. Now, it's so for example, I have Quinn here. It's a skeletal mesh, so it creates a skeletal mesh actor with Quinn attached to it. However, if I was to use something like if I was to use a mesh, it will create a mesh actor with the mesh attached. If I was to use a material, let me just find a material. So, for example, I have a material for Quinn. If I was to drag it in, what it would do is you can't create the material as an actor. There isn't a material actor. So it will just assign it to whatever material is below me. So you can see that it's now added it to the floor, giving us this lovely shiny floor. I'm going to control C out of that. So if you want to, you can drag in assets from the content browser and place them within the world. And this is my usual way of doing stuff, really. Now, for example, I'll see if there's any. There are a bunch of meshes, but we don't have a lot to play with at this point. So this is where I'm going to start talking about one of the first ways of us importing stuff. So at the top here, we have an import, but an add function here. Now, if I was to select add, you would see it's going to allow me to create new assets. Basically, I'm creating a new blueprint class, which is a sort of something that has code in it, a material, a level, a Niagara system, which is our particle system thing. But also at the top, I've got an import, and we will go through some importing. But they've also got add features and content pack. So you'd see if I fire this up, you can see that this will allow us to drag in stuff from other content packs. So for example, the vehicle, say I needed the car, I could just come in here and add to project, and it will add the entire vehicle setup to this project. It's missing a plugin, but it doesn't matter too much. But now I can drag the car into the world. Or not. It's complaining about missing what's his name, but in theory, you get the idea. But the other one that I wanted to demonstrate was adding a feature and content pack, and that would be under content. We add starter content. So if I push add to project, see it doesn't want to add the car in unless we've got the chaos, the correct plugin installed. Just dismiss that. And you'll see under the starter content, we now have a load of stuff. We have props, which is a bunch of a bunch of meshes that we can just add to a scene. So for example, we have a bush here. But that's going to give us access to a bunch of different things. Now, this is considered an instance that is in the world. These are considered classes, so blueprint classes. So, and you can double click on these, and it's going to open up the appropriate editing window that goes with it. It's also got some particle systems. The only thing I'd say about the particle systems is they are in Cascade, which is our previous version of Niagara is what we use at the moment. There is a plugin inside. There is a plugin which allows you to convert them, but I'll go over that in the course. But it gives you some explosions, some smoke, some sparks, and some steam, which is great if you are just starting out and you just need some stuff. Okay. So that's how to add stuff via a import other elements. Well, there's a couple of things I want to discuss. Filters and favorites and collections. So navigating and working your way around this it's going to get confusing as stuff gets larger. So in this, under collections, we have collections. And if you just push plus under collections, you can create a local collections, and you could call it something like meshes. And you would be able to select specific elements. So if I come under start content and go under so it's under props, I think. I could grab these and place them within my meshes category. And then that means wherever I am, I can select the category and I can always come in and drag these things in. So the collections just allows you to create a group so you can quickly sort of see things that you use. I usually create like one for like commonly used. If I know I'm going to be using the same files and opening them 50 times, I'll create a collection. Also, we can, if we know that there is a folder we're going to use a lot. Say I know that we're going to use the starter content audio a lot. I could right-hand click and I could go add to favorites. That will add it into my favorites panel here, meaning I can quickly access it. Also, I could set the color. So I could change it to red because I know it's important. Then I can quickly find this audio directory whenever I need it. Okay, so that is so those are two ways of sort of bookmarking stuff realistically. The other element that you can do is you can use filters. So say I wanted to find all the meshes. You can see on the left-hand side here, we have a filter selection. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to select static meshes. And that is going to show us all of the different static meshes which are within the project because I have the content directory highlighted. Now, as I move to different directories, it's only going to show me stuff that's below that directory. Now, you can use any of the classes as a means of doing it. You can also use, I've got something that goes me everything, for example. So it is, there's specific code that goes to that. You can see if I edit that, it's got a filter string of nothing, just so that I can see absolutely everything in the project. And also you can search here. So if I wanted to find everything that was to do with the sports car, I can, I think it's sports. So that will give me everything to do with the sports car. Okay, right. Let's get on to importing because I have not done anything on this yet. So the first thing is, how would you import let's find a, let's do the marketplace, how we get stuff in from the marketplace. So say you want to get an asset pack into your project. I have my projects here and I have my engine versions, but at the bottom of this screen, I have the vault. Now, this is all of the asset packs which I have purchased in inverted commas, since a lot of them are free. And these are the ones that I can add to my project straight away. Now, you'll see that next to these, there are little different messages. It says add to project, or it says create project, or it would say add to engine for plugins. Now, if you are adding it to the engine for a plugin, I can't find one here, but what you will end up doing is it will be an available option within the plugins directory. So you have to add it to the engine here and then select it from the plugin directory. If you want to create a project, this is for files which are you can't just add these to a project. You have to create an entire project and then move the files from that project into whatever project you're working. So for example, is the content example. You can't add to a project, you have to create a project in its own right. Now, here's a good one that I'll add to this project. This is basic pickup VR set Niagara. If I was to add to project, I've forgotten what I call my project now. So wait a second. What was it called? It was called intro. Okay, so if I was to add to intro, select that, add to project. Now it's already downloaded, so it's on my project, so it was super quick. Now, once I've pushed add to project and select it, we can now go into the project. We can go into the project and you should see that we have pickup sets. So all of the files that are part of that are now in here. So I can drag these into the project. And if I simulate, you can see that these files are directly, so it's super quick. Just need to, best thing, yes. So I can get these into the project just by bringing them in that way. This is one of the asset packs that quite a few people used because it fit with styles and it's free. So that's quite a good one. So that is I'm aware that we've got loads of time afterwards for questions, but I want to make sure I cover everything. So that's how you bring stuff in from the vault. You purchase it in the marketplace. You need to wait a little bit. Then you either create a project and move the files over into your project that you want, or you add directly to the project. Now, bear in mind that whenever you download anything, it will create a copy on your system. So as you can see here, my vault is 107 gigabytes, and that can get big quickly. So just be aware that that exists. Okay, right. Next up, ways of importing into the project. Now I'm going to create my file directory, and I'm going to look for an FBX that I can import. So the other option is I can either right-hand click and import in, or I can choose the import button here. Then after that, we're going to look for something that we can import. So I've got a gearbox. Okay, so if I right-hand click, this is an FBX, which is a file format that you can export stuff from Maya or Blender or whatever your tool of choice is. Right-hand click and import. Then when we're importing it in, it has no skeletal mesh. I could build nanite on selection. I will, just for the fun of it. And mostly the defaults are pretty good. So I'll sit there and do the import. And that's going to bring in my gearbox. Now, it also brings in the material with it. This is just a model. So the gearbox itself just has a plain material. But say I did want to, I'll see if I can find the full model on my computer. One sec. See if I can find the materials that go with that. No, not off the top. But say I wanted to create a material, I would be able to import into desktop's got a lot of stuff. I can just find materials within the desktop, and I can. So these are PNG files at this point. Open it up, and are you sure you want to override texture? So apparently it's already in here. Let's do yes. Okay, so I've got and this material I could then use within the material sort of setup. It's imported a normal map as well. So it's got a good idea of, it does try and apply the correct compression to images when it brings it in. But again, it's just a question of import into my game and selecting, it'll either be FBX, skeletal meshes, or materials for the majority of the time. Now, we've got 10 minutes. So we also have something that's called the Quixel Bridge. And I'm going to fire this up. So under here, you can select, we can jump into the Quixel Bridge. Now, I always spend about half an hour trying to sign in. So I will just attempt to do that off to the side. Continue. You know what? I might demonstrate that in the chat afterwards. But what we have here is we have a massive library of photogrammetry scanned assets and materials and decals that have been used all over the place in loads of games and films and stuff like that. And they're beautiful, but they also can be quite big. And in order to get these into the game, this is actually integrated with the engine quite well. All you would need to do really is select the object or material that you want to import. It's going to give you some details such as the size. So say I select, you can see here it usually has a little person next to it. If it doesn't, it means it's huge. And if it is closed or open, and you scan a big mountain face, you can't get the underneath, so it may be open. And once you're signed in correctly, you've got an option to just download it, much like Bolt. It would download it to your computer, and then you can add it to any project that you're running. And it will create a new directory and it will install it in. The only thing I would suggest is these get big. If you're going to use a lot of them, see what they're like on low quality or medium quality, because they're still pretty damn good, especially if they're off in the background. You might get away with that. So don't immediately go for high or nanite. Just start with the low quality so we can keep the project files vaguely good size. So it's got, if you look under surfaces, it's got a load of materials that can be used. If you look under, you've got loads of plants. This place excels in realistic looking stuff that you could scan within the real world. So there's a ton of stuff in here, but you won't get much things like sci-fi, stuff like that. Okay, so I'll demonstrate that if needed. It's just, it takes me a while to log on and I want to make sure I get through everything here. So next 5 minutes, I'd like to talk about getting stuff into your project. Now you'll notice with Vault and with Quixel and with all of these different things, you're going to bring a lot of stuff into your projects. Oh yeah, the other way of moving stuff into your projects is physically moving stuff into your project, which I don't sort of often sort of recommend because you'll break references. Now, how we recommended that a lot of people worked in the previous fellowships was they didn't install stuff immediately into the project that they were working on. What they did was they had a sort of staging sort of template, which they would bring files into, select the files they specifically wanted, and then they would use something called the migrate functionality. Now, I will just show you this for 1 second. So if I focus on this, oh, and this is another quick thing as well. If you have something selected within the viewport and you want to find it in the browser, if you hold down Control and B, it will navigate to the directory and it will highlight the actor. There's another thing from there as well. If you press Control and E, it will open it up in its specific sort of editor sort of details. But Control and E, you will now see that I found the bush. Now, if I wanted to take this bush and only this bush and nothing else and move it into my project, I could do something called migrate. And if I right-hand click and come up, you can see we've got a load of different options here. But under Asset Actions, we've got an option for migrate. Now, if I was to select migrate, First thing it's going to ask you to do is to save all the content. So I click save. And then secondly, it's going to go through all of the dependencies which are are required or are connected to this bush. And you can see here, it's looking at the material, it's looking at the textures which are part of the material, and it's getting the mesh itself. So we're getting 4 files ultimately: the bush, the material bush, the mesh. So we've got the material, the mesh, and the 2 textures required in the mesh. And it is going to say we will migrate all of this, but it's not only going to migrate these, it's going to migrate the start content filter, the prop filter, the material filter, and the folder, not filter. And that way, it will move it across to the file with all of its dependencies in place. Now, that's great from a size point of view, because you're only going to be dragging across the stuff that you need. It's not fantastic from the structure of your project. Your project is going to get very confusing if you're dragging stuff in, and with all of them comes lots and lots of project files. Now, this isn't an easy thing to fix. I know we've got 2 minutes left, so I'll sort of finish up on this. What you can do, and I'll demonstrate, is I've got some scripts that will allow you to sort an entire project into a folder structure that you're used to, that you're happy with. And this will allow you to import, but all of your files will be in the same folders as the project files that you've got and things. So there are other ways around it, but just be aware at this point that this is a problem. The references need to be correct. So not only do we need to have this texture within the project that it's moved to, but it needs to have the exact same reference path. It needs to be in the content, starter content, textures, but in order for the reference to not be broken. Okay, so I think I've covered pretty much everything here. Lighting, we've got a course on lighting. We'll go in details. Same thing with materials. And so I won't touch too much on that. But if you want to bring them up in the lab, feel free to. Otherwise, I am just going to I'll ask you to take 2 minutes if you are outside or watching this as a recording to complete the course evaluation. People on the fellowship will actually be asked for their feedback numerous times in different cases, so that's cool. And thank you. Here's a picture of me. Cheers, everybody.